Good morning. I feel like we covered it, so I'm done. It's that. When the first service, when Pat said, turn to the screen, and I was waiting for myself to pop up and do the sermon. I thought, great, I get to hear what I talk about. It's not that bad, okay? Gosh. We're going to look at Matthew 25, just like it said on the screen, one of Jesus' parables. Before we do that, let's pray together real quick. God, thank you for the opportunity to hang out together and to open your word. Help us not take that for granted, that we get to walk through your word, that when we wonder about aspects of our life and what would you say, what is your direction, that we have something. We have a roadmap. And we also have your spirit, and you promise that you'll guide us through that. So do that. Help us just kind of block out everything else that's going on in the world and listen to your word and be guided by your spirit with this particular story and truth. It's in Jesus' name, amen. One of the things I like about technology, and I am the old man yelling, get off my lawn now, so I'm not usually the guy that likes things about technology. But one of the things I like is that I can remember something and talk to my son, who of course is much younger, and he can go find it on YouTube, so we share the experience. So I was talking about Green Acres. Anybody seen Green Acres? Come on. Is there not anybody old? So Green Acres was a sitcom back in the day, and it was one of three that came out together that were sister shows. So you had Beverly Hillbillies, and then you had Petticoat Junction, and you had Green Acres, same creators, same thing, and it's all the same kind of a theory, fish out of water. You know, somebody in the wrong spot, unusual. Green Acres was Oliver Wendell Holmes, was the successful attorney from New York that decided he always wanted to have a farm, and so he bought a farm without ever seeing it out in the country in, where was it? Hooterville. Moved out to Hooterville and took Zsa Zsa, his wife Lisa, Zsa Zsa Gabor, the Hungarian beauty, with him and with all her jewels and her clothing and everything. And they went into this dumpy little farm, and everything kind of builds off that whole fish out of water stuff. It was one of the first sitcoms, too. This has nothing to do with my sermon, but I found it fascinating. That it broke the fourth plane in theater, where the people on screen would acknowledge something that we could hear that they were not supposed to hear. So when Oliver Wendell would go off on these speeches about the origins of the country or democracy or whatever it happened to be, there would always be this fife playing, this kind of the Revolutionary War kind of music playing, but the actors would acknowledge they could hear it. That was one of the first times that ever happened. Like, what? Where's that coming from? A lot of characters. One of my favorite was Mr. Haney. Mr. Haney talked like this. Pat Buttram was his name. Successful actor in the 40s. He was in over 40 movies with Gene Autry, a lot of Westerns. And he said that his voice sounded like that because he never completely went through puberty. But fascinating guy. Funny guy, but Mr. Haney's who sold him the farm that he'd never seen that was a dump. And whenever Oliver needed something, Mr. Haney would always show up with the ability to sell it. And he had a truck, and he'd always have like signs on the truck acknowledging whatever he happened to be selling that day, which was, of course, exactly what you need, because he was Johnny on the spot. He could always make a buck. He was always hustling, and a little sleazy, a little bit, you know, like I can't really trust him. That's kind of how Hollywood, and I think a lot of the world, portrays somebody that's hustling. Somebody that's trying to make some money. Somebody's trying to come up with some way, take care of the family, create something. It's like, maybe you're a little sleazy. Maybe don't know if I can really trust you completely. I don't think that's accurate. I think it happens a lot. And it's not just Green Acres, Mr. Haney. Old infomercial, late at night. Remember watching, this guy comes on, and his name's Tom Vu. And Tom Vu, it says, Tom Vu can help you. I always remember that. Tom Vu. And he's going to teach me how to buy real estate with no money down, and I can make a lot of money, and I can be very rich very quickly, because Tom Vu's going to help me. And I can go to a free seminar for a day, and then if I want to learn a little bit more for $1,500, I can go to a 2-day seminar. And if I want to learn a little bit more for a full week, I can go to a $15,000 seminar. And Tom Vu's going to help me. So I remembered that, and I thought, first of all, if you have a phone, there is no question it should go unanswered. You can find it. So I went down the rabbit hole. Whatever happened to Tom Vu? Well, Tom Vu's still out there. Tom Vu actually did become wealthy, not by selling real estate, by teaching you and I how to not sell real estate. They actually did a research, and they looked at 1,300 people that went through all his seminars and could not find one that had ever successfully made any money doing it. He made money selling the seminar for me to go to. Today, Tom Vu's still around. He's not doing real estate. He's a professional poker player and seems to be doing pretty good. So, Tom Vu. A lot of different ways you can make money, but I don't think it's necessarily a biblical worldview, but it's a worldview that a lot of folks that are hustling and trying to do stuff and make some cash, can't really trust, maybe being a little crooked. Maybe there's even a spiritual dynamic that if you try to achieve, if you are ambitious by nature, maybe that's some kind of a separation from God kind of a thing, that the less I have, the more religious I am. The less I have, the closer I am to God. I think this particular story we're going to unpack kind of flies in the face of all that. So when Brett asked me to come this time, he said, hey, we're going to be doing some parables, and so I picked this particular parable. I make my living traveling around and working with churches all over the country and faith-based nonprofits, and primarily in the world of raising money. We've raised a lot of money. So I'm usually talking about money, but from that perspective. But generosity, giving, those kind of things. This is different. This is about earning. That God's perspective on how we apply ourselves and make a living and earn money. Now, the world has lots of experts on everything about your life. Whatever you're wondering about, how should I live my life? The world's got an expert. The Bible is also a foundational expert on everything in your life and how you should live your life. What's the biblical perspective? And the most accurate, in my humble but accurate opinion, is listening to the red letter edition part. What's Jesus say? What's Jesus got to say about it? Well, there are 38 parables that Jesus told during his ministry. Parables were just stories that would illustrate a point. That Jesus would be teaching to a group of folks, and he'd say, hey, it kind of reminds me of a story, and he'd tell the story, and the story would just illustrate that and make it come to life. Of the 38, 16, more than any other single subject, dealt with wealth. 16 of the 38 parables in some form. Why? Because God knew that at the foundation of our heart, a lot was going to be revealed by how we dealt with stuff, how we dealt with wealth, how we dealt with jobs, how we dealt with work. And this particular one unpacks the whole ambitious thing, that applying ourselves, trying to create something, trying to build on something. What's the worldview? What's a God's view on that? So he tells a story of and this is kind of the God piece of this, like if God was this landowner. Landowner goes on a trip. He's going to be gone for an extended period of time, and so he says, hey, bring together my servants, and I'm going to entrust wealth to them. It's not like I can just leave it in the house, so I'm going to entrust it to you, and I want you to invest it and do something with it and take care of it, and I'll come back and I'll give an account. That's always a little nerve-wracking when you know somebody's going to look at something you've done and give an account. I figured out the other day, this is crazy, that I have rented 2,000 cars. Isn't that crazy? Not just for the heck of it, it's because I travel, but I'm in a rental car. I'm always in the bad news is I never know how to start them because they're all different. Last night, the one that they gave me, I sat there like a ding-dong forever trying to, how do you turn this thing on? It's frustrating. But the nerve-wracking piece is when you take it back. It's like, I only had it for a few hours, only had it for a day or two, got to take it back, but I've got to give an account. They're going to charge me dings, if I've done something that's happened to this car while I had it. Well, it's the same thing with the wealth. So he brings in his servants and he says, okay, I'm going to give the one guy 5 talents. Talents were a denomination size of wealth. So just to get our minds wrapped around it, say it's $1,000. So 5 of those would be $5,000. And then there's another guy, he's going to give you 2, so that's 2 talents, $2,000. And then one guy's going to get one talent. Here's $1,000. Then he goes on his trip and he comes back. And when he comes back, he says, all right, bring back what I gave you and show me what you did. 5-talent guy comes back and says, hey, I really got out and hustled. And I was able to double what you gave me. The 5 is now 10. He says, fantastic, reward. This is great, thank you. Second guy comes in, he goes, you gave me the 2. I was able to hustle. I was able to double it. It's now 4. He is fantastic. Reward. Thank you very much for what you did. 1-talent guy comes. He says, hey, I knew you were a hard dude. I knew you were difficult. I knew that if I did something and something happened to that $1,000, that I was going to be in trouble, and I was scared about that, and so I buried it. And so I dug it up, and here it is, a little dirty, but here's your $1,000. He does not reward him. This is God. He does not reward him for, hey, thanks for taking care of that. Thanks for burying that and make sure nothing happened to it. He says, no, I entrusted you to do something. Why didn't you, and this is him, why didn't you at least put it in the bank and earn a little bit of interest? Why didn't you do something with it? So he's chastised for not doing more with what God blessed him with. Each of us have a life. Each of us have different blessings. 5-talent people, 2-talent, 1-talent, but there is an account coming. So here's a few points, principles that I walk away with. Number 1, there's going to be an audit. God will hold us accountable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who goes on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. As Christians, especially I believe in North America, there is a temptation to think that God will grade on a curve and not be too harsh on us because most of us are not real wealthy. It's like, never had a lot, and I don't really have the burden of doing a lot with what I have because it was modest, meager to begin with. In my, as I tell my son, my humble but accurate opinion, that's wrong. Because if you're sitting in this room in 2024 in North America, you're blessed. You're blessed. Do you know if you just made poverty level, never got over poverty level, your income for your whole working career, over $500,000 is going to go through your hands. If you made $60,000 during your working career for the regular working career time period, $2.5, $3 million is going to go through your hands. A lot of you are going to make a lot more than that. You and I are blessed even by just where we happen to be. Now, I'm not like a crazy world traveler, but God's taken me to a lot of places. And I've been rural China and South America. And I remember I was standing in a home in Ecuador. And it was a shanty town where everybody's little shacks kind of stood beside each other's. And they're very proud to share their home with me. But all the walls, which are very, very flimsy, stopped about a foot off the ground. So you had the frame, but the wall itself didn't go all the way to the ground. And I said, why is that? I said, because when the rainy season comes, if the wall's all the way to the ground, the shacks will all get completely wiped out by the rains. So we have to have about a foot up so the water can just freely run through during the rainy season. You're blessed. We are blessed. And what we do with what we have says a lot about us. Now, we're not all 5-talent people. There are 5-talent people. There are those that have that ability to do amazing things. I enjoy biographies. Have you read Shoe Dog? Shoe Dog's a book that Phil Ling wrote about Nike, the origins of Nike, and selling those sneakers that were running shoes because he was a runner from the University of Oregon, and he was selling them out of the trunk of his car that I've got this better, actually used a waffle iron to try to come up with what the sole was going to look like. That's 5-talent. Joseph, the Old Testament. His brothers are jealous. They throw him in a pit. They talk themselves out of killing him. Instead, they sell him into slavery. He ends up finding himself in Potiphar's home. Potiphar's a wealthy, connected dude. He does so well with everything that he's entrusted with that Potiphar eventually lets him run this whole household. And from there, after some turns, he ends up being the second in command of this whole country of Egypt, and through a famine helps them survive. That's a 5-talent person. But then there are 2, and then there are 1, but we're all going to be held accountable for how we've been blessed. Verse 19, after a long time, the master of the servants returned and settled accounts with them. We all stand before God, and have an audit. Or say, God, I was on this earth for this period of time. This is what you blessed me with. This is what happened. This is what I did with what you blessed me with. Okay, so what is God measuring? What's he measuring? How much money we made? That's different. Number one, I think he looks at our motivation. Ephesians chapter 4. He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work doing something useful with his hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. See, ambition is God-directed, but ambition to accumulate and accomplish is not for self-indulgence. It is so that I can be generous and help other people. So the more that I have the ability to do gives me a bigger bucket to ladle things out of the bucket and help somebody else. The motivation for what gives me the ambition. 2, it's a value, it's a usefulness, but work doing something useful with his hands. You can make money and not be useful. So being ambitious, trying to accomplish, but blindly is not the goal. National Geographic has a show, I think it's Mariana Van Zeller, something like that's her name, that hosted, and it's called Trafficked. And she goes in some dicey places all over the world and investigates the kind of the underbelly of greed. And you can imagine everything from human trafficking to drugs. But then there are other schemes, those that steal identities, or that have pump and dump schemes for a Bitcoin or a stock to get people to invest, and then suddenly it goes away because it was all fake to begin with. So you can hustle, you can accumulate, you can be successful, but not doing something useful. And then third, it's the honesty quotient. Our diligence, our effort in the honesty. One talent, the man buries it. He says, you wicked slave. Thieves steal, conmen deceive, gamblers risk. Character is not demanded by get-rich-quick schemes. Character doesn't get in that way. I have a friend named Paul. Paul owned a whole bunch of McDonald's restaurants. And one day he was visiting one of his stores, and he's not driving a vehicle that says McDonald's, and he's not wearing a shirt that says McDonald's, so nobody knows who he is. And he's parked beside the restaurant, but before he goes inside, he notices this lady get out of her car, walk over to the side of the McDonald's, and she's near the door, and he watches her as she sits on the ground, and then she takes her purse and turns it upside down and dumps her stuff off, and then she gets herself all situated before she starts yelling that she's had an accident. Remember, he's watched her do all this. And he says, more importantly, his security cameras watched her do all this. He says, so he got up and he went over to her, and she says, you got to call somebody. You got to call somebody. He says, I already have. I have called somebody. Not an ambulance, a policeman. You're going to jail. See, the character piece is the missing ingredient. Proverbs 28:19. He who works with his land will have abundant food, but the one who chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty. How do we steal? Not everybody lays beside McDonald's and pretends that they had an accident and wants to sue, slips in the grocery store. But I think that it's easier for us to fall into that category than we think. I believe that one of the ways we have almost glossed over theft is when we don't apply ourselves to do the best we possibly can at whatever job we've been hired to do. That's stealing. When we don't give it our all. Now, sometimes we justify it. It's not that good of a job. It's just something I got to do for right now. I'm really not that into it. And as if it justifies I don't have to give it the 100% because it's not that great. It's not something I really want to do. If you signed on to do it, then it's your job to do the best you possibly can, because that not only honors God, but it helps you be the best you possibly can. And that's a missing ingredient. Now, I don't know if you can teach it. I do think that there are ways to help illustrate it. I interviewed years ago the CEO of Nordstrom's, and interest company, family company. Back then, and I don't know if they still do it or not, but every generation, that group of the family would share the responsibilities of leading the company. So when I interviewed him, there were literally 5 brothers and 1 brother-in-law. All 6 of them were co-CEOs, and they did different things in the company. So very interesting. And so I said, well, talk to me about having family work. You got a lot of family in your company. It's a big company, but, not all family. Some of them got silver spoons and don't think they should really work that hard. And he goes, well, if you want to work here, the very first job, come out of college, whatever, and you want to work at the company business, your first responsibility is you got to sell women's shoes. I thought, that is fascinating. He says, you find out real quick whether you want to do this or not. Sell women's shoes. Now, the patriarch of the company started all Nordstrom's was a women's shoe store, so it makes a little bit of a sense. But Proverbs 10:9, the man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out. Few things will test our character like the opportunity to make money. 1 Corinthians 4:2. It is required that those who have been given a trust prove faithful. 2, controlled ambition's not wrong. God rewards ambition. So he looks at the 5-talent guy, you doubled it, fantastic, thank you very much. The 2-talent guy, you doubled it, fantastic, thank you very much. The 1-talent guy buries it, you're a wicked servant. Our innate nature to create and achieve is good. It is not something that, there's not something that like, well, if I'm really close to God, then I won't be mindful of trying to work so hard, create, get jobs, make money, take care of my family. No, that is part of your responsibility. Philippians 3, brothers, and this is Paul talking, I don't consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but this one thing I do, forgetting that which is behind, straining toward that which is before, I press on toward the goal with the prize for which God has called me. Pressing on toward the goal. What's the goal going to be? How we're judged, though, is by ourselves. He did not judge the 2-talent person, say, hey, you know what? Why didn't you make as much as the 5-talent person did? No, he was judged according to what he did with what he had, not with what somebody else had. Watch the Olympics. You guys watch the Olympics. I can't remember which one. One of the swimmers really, a lot of medals. But I noticed at one particular race, the 9 previous world records in that particular race were all hers. So you're not racing against lane 2. You're racing against yourself. Be the best that you can possibly be. Proverbs 14:23. Hard work brings a profit, but mere talk only leads to poverty. Proverbs 23:4. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Here's the last one I'll hit. And this is one that'll probably surprise you. Profit's not evil. Profit is actually pleasing to God. It's not a pseudo-spiritual, take a little socialism, little Christianity, put it together, and if I don't have stuff, somehow I'm closer to God. No, it's what did you do with what God blessed you with? And your ability to create and do something with it is the goal. It's not a sanctified socialism. It is how'd you do with what God blessed you with? So Jesus, before he's 30 years old, before he starts his public ministry, what was he doing? He was a carpenter. He made products. He sold those products, take care of his family. You remember when I was a little kid and we'd go to Sunday school and remember the songs. Remember Zacchaeus? Remember the song? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted. Are you all pagans? Did none of you know about little Zacchaeus? He was a wee little man. I know that because the song said he was a wee little man. He climbed up in the sycamore tree. I got messed up on the song as a kid because I always said that it said he came down from the tree because he wanted to go have tea. I don't know where I got that, but it was a British Zacchaeus. But So Zacchaeus is a tax collector, first century tax collector. He's a wealthy man. How did he get wealthy? They had districts, and their responsibility was not only to collect the taxes, but the harder you could be at collecting taxes, the more you could shake folks down to pay those taxes, you got percentages. So you got wealthier the more that you collected. You could even juice it up a little bit. So Zacchaeus had become wealthy partly because he exploited people that in his job. He encounters Jesus. Jesus transforms his worldview. Jesus does not tell him to do this. On his own, he says, here's what I'm going to do. If I've cheated anybody, I'm going to repay them and more. I'm going to go through my accounts, and if I've cheated somebody, put the thumb on the scale, I'm going to give it back to them and more. And secondly, I'm going to give half of my wealth away to people in need. Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant. Notice Jesus does not ask him for that, and Jesus does not say, hey, where'd you come up with the half you're going to give away to help people? Why don't you give away more? You got a lot. He doesn't do that. That was Zacchaeus' response to coming and encounter with Jesus. I think we have to be careful on the ambitious side, especially when we start judging other people and how ambitious they are and what they do. We're judged according to what we do, according to how we've been blessed and how we use that. But how that manifests itself is different for everyone. So maybe you're like Phil Knight of Nike, and you create something, and it's wildly successful, and you have that innate ability to create and produce, and wealth follows that. Then I think you have a responsibility. Remember the motivation at the very beginning? I do those things so that I can bless others. All right, how are you blessing other people? But we're not all in that box. Sometimes the 5 talents and the 2 talents are in different boxes, but we're still going to be judged with what we did with it. Earlier this summer, I got a call from one of my cousins, and I don't know in your family, in my family, our cousins, as we all grow older, the only time we see each other is when somebody dies or somebody gets married. And so my Uncle Jim had passed away, and the kids had said, hey, would you do the funeral? And I said, sure. And they were he was going to be buried by my Aunt Betsy that had already passed away in Huntington, West Virginia. And so I'm going to go back and meet them, which is fun. I haven't seen them in years, and they're all over the country. And I said, so as I'm doing the service, in a small, intimate family service, I said, I want to tell you some Jim stories I heard as a kid, and I want you, as his grown children, tell me if they were all lies. How much of this is real, how much is not real? Because I've always heard Jim stories my whole life. Well, Jim was an unusual, colorful character. So my dad was a preacher. He's in Ohio. His sister Betsy, who married Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim, she met in college down in Florida. And he, not a believer at that stage, was recruited by the CIA while he was in college. And so he went to work for the CIA, lived all over the world in different places, he and Betsy. And my dad would send him things to read as this kind of a non-pushy way to talk about faith. And Jim was intellectual, and he liked to read. And so he would take those. But here's the part I didn't tell you about Jim. The reason I recruited him, and it's very unusual, is he had one skill. He's Jason Bourne. No, that's not it. That was a different skill. No. He's Liam Neeson. No, it's a different skill. He was a language expert. So he could 14, 15 languages. When he was 90 years old in the nursing home, they told me he was teaching himself Romanian. That when his caregivers would come in, he had one that was Jamaican, one that was Russian, and he would always speak to them in their language. Just crazy stuff. That was in this weird thing. So Dad sent him things to read, and he started to study because he already knew Greek and Hebrew, so he knew Bible languages, and he would study Old Testament prophecies and fulfillment in the New Testament. And as he did that, he became convicted that was true. You couldn't make this stuff up. So, and I asked my cousins, they said this part was true in the story, is he called my dad one night, Dad was living in Columbus, Ohio. At the time, he was living here in D.C. area. And he said, hey, I'm going to fly into Columbus. I want you to baptize me. And so Uncle Jim flew to Columbus. Dad baptized him. He flew back home. He got to thinking, he says, now that I believe this and I'm a believer, and he talked about his coming to faith was a rush of reason, not a rush of emotion. A rush of reason. But he thought, I know Greek, Hebrew, and all that stuff. I'd like to teach seminary, but I don't have any Bible college background. So he found a college in Illinois that let him go to Bible college and seminary while he taught Greek and Hebrew to put himself through. And then when he was finished, he gets a call to go to Hong Kong to work in a seminary where he teaches Greek and Hebrew to Chinese people. I don't even know how you do that. How do you get your mind around that? I'm just thinking there, I have a hard time with English, and I took Spanish 3 times. How do you do it? He and Betsy lived the last 20 years of their life in Hong Kong. He's like 6'5" and wore his hair high and tight, so I'm sure he stood out in Hong Kong. They weren't wealthy people. But he was a 5-talent guy. And when he stood before God to give an account, I think he'd have a great account. This is what I did with the 5 talents you gave me. I do think there's an audit. I do think we're going to stand before God and say, in the brief time that I was here on this earth, this is what I did with what you gave me. I think they're all different buckets. Some of us have the ability to hustle, make money, hire people, create jobs, and it's what we do then. We're using that to do what? Some of us have those abilities like Jim's like, you know what? I got this DNA that lets me grasp language, and I could really help build some bridges here for people to understand this. But there will be an audit. That's the story, I think, of this parable. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for your word and your truth, that we live our lives not as a guessing game wondering what it is God wants me to do, but we can actually study and understand that for ourselves. Help us never take that for granted. Help us not to let that get us off the hook. No, we have a responsibility we're responsible for our own education, to study the word, and we ask for your Spirit to guide us through that so we have a better understanding of how you want us to live our lives. And help us to realize it's very practical, that even the mundane of applying ourselves, of working hard, of making a living, of taking care of our family, of being generous to other people, of using the talents that you've blessed us with. Help us not to get caught up in trying to always compare to somebody else. The 1 talent compares to the 5 talent. No, it's my lane. Stay in my lane. What have I done with what you've given me? But I thank you that regardless, it is not how hard we work that brings us into your presence. It's your grace and your mercy. That we can't earn our way to salvation. We can't apply ourselves our way to salvation. But it's your grace and your mercy. And I thank you and I praise you. In Jesus' name.